Welcome on in to Two Pad Stack. You'll notice Ace isn't here today if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're sitting here on Spotify just going, that's not the normal intro voice, well, you're probably right. Ace needs to take a little bit of a break this week. He's got some other commitments, so it's just me, Jake Reiser, from the start of the season, who's kind of taking over hosting duties for the day. But don't worry, I'm not alone. I brought a friend with me. You're here from Goalie Hugs. We have Nick Lanciani. Nick, how's it going today?
Hey there, it's going pretty well. I've done a lot of nothing. No, I've mostly just been outlining a bunch of things for the week.
It's been a busy week. Last week was a busy week. This week is a busy week. It never stops.
Pretty much.
It never stops for the Bruins, too. So we have a lot to talk about. We certainly have a lot to cover. We had 3 games since the last time Ace and I recorded. 2 not so great. 1 hopefully kind of spark plug for the future. We'll kind of walk you through our thoughts on those games and what the week is. As usual, we have our studs and our duds. And we've got an interesting topic we want to batter on after that. There's something that, could be floating around in the air that we just want to talk about before we get into the next week's games. But with that, I guess let's start with last week. Since we last recorded, we had 3 bouts. We had last talked after the overtime loss to Utah. We had said going to Nashville, try and batter them. They were 0-5-0 at the time of recording. Try and keep them unwinning. Hopefully take a good win and bring it back home and start to play better. And literally the complete opposite happened. They got shut out 4-0 in Music City. Everything was flat. The notes, the speed, the offense, everything. It just feels like you hit rock bottom. I don't know what you made of that game, Nick, but I was so miserable after that.
I feel like I just stopped paying attention in the third period. Like I actually got up during the game, not just the commercials, and grabbed a snack because I was like, this one, just forget about it. Move on. Tomorrow's a new day.
We certainly saw some interesting things there that I had talked about in the previous week, namely Marchand on a line with Lindholm and Bergeron, kind of that baby perfection line, and just something's still not working. And we'll talk about it throughout the week that the top 6 and the top 9 offense still feels non-existent. But especially in that game against Nashville, it felt like there was so much line shuffling. It made your head spin. And it makes me wonder how much does this line shifting actually work? And at what point do you stop and just say, okay, these are my lines. We're going to develop the chemistry. Let's give it a week or 2, and then we'll reassess. Because I feel like we've had 8 games and 8 lineups.
That is a huge thing for me in that if I were coaching, I would probably make an adjustment, like halfway through the period and stick with it. You can play musical chairs all you want through the first 40 minutes, but by the third period, stick with something. See what you have. See what someone can create by forging a relationship as opposed to saying, all right, this shift you're on this line, the next shift, forget about it. We're doing this. The obvious exception is if there was a power play or penalty kill, and guys have been out there forever, as we saw in one of the more recent games, where it was kind of a makeshift line for one shift just to give everyone a break. But that's been my major criticism in a way for the entire Jim Montgomery era, is that when things don't seem to be going well, he throws things in a blender, and instead of just throwing in a blender and making a smoothie, he'll throw that smoothie back in the blender and make even more smooth of a smoothie. I don't know. There's an analogy somewhere there.
Yeah, it's a puree. He throws in a puree. You lose the chunkiness of it, and it's all too smooth, and it like passes through a fine mesh sieve way too well.
I would never do well on the Bears, clearly.
I guess that can also kind of lead in well to the next game, talking about lines going in a blender. That we've talked so much this season about how incredible the fourth line is of John Beecher, Mark Kastelik, and Cole Koepke. And all of a sudden, for the next game, it was that home game against the Dallas Stars. We break up that fourth line. Cole Koepke ends up as your third line left wing. I don't get it. I just don't get that constant movement, the constant rotation. It didn't work in that game. As I said last week, I was with my dad at that game. Normally, he and I are great. He and I had a streak of about 9 seasons where we would go undefeated at a Bruins game, and our first loss was 2019. And unfortunately, it was game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals. So it might have been the worst time to start a losing streak. We pulled it back up last year, Black Friday. We went down to MSG to see the Bruins play the Rangers.
Mhm.
But we walked out of the Garden, he said it might have been the worst game I've ever seen them play since we've been going together. They looked flat, they looked unenergetic. Granted, they did at least score 2 goals, but they just looked apathetic for most of the entire game. 5-on-5 offense, still completely non-existent. That it was a 4-on-4 goal and a power play goal that the Bees had. Undisciplined on the PK, that's a big, big, big point. Again, that goes back to coaching. I don't know whether it was Joe Sacco who was coaching the PK last year. I don't know if Jay Leach is the one coaching it this year. Whoever is running that penalty kill is doing a terrible, terrible, terrible job. They gave up 3 power play goals in Colorado last week. They gave up 3 goals against Dallas on the power play this week. It's something that's gonna kill you. It's weird because it's been the hallmark of every good Bruins team is, "All right,
Right.
we can kill penalties. We are a top 5 PK team in the league."
I can't figure out if it's something that's systematic or if it's just back to the whole chemistry thing. If it's this earlier in the year, you've had a lot of roster turnover, and in some cases, players are playing above where they should be playing. So, figure out the kinks in the system and move forward. But that goes back to the whole I think by the first eighth of the season, which we're upcoming on game number 10 already, you should really have something solidified. The first 5 games, it can be kinda chaotic, but after that, you should have some idea of what you should be doing, and I don't know that we've seen that from really the power play or the penalty kill, because the main plan on the power play is just get the puck to David Pastrnak because we're the Washington Capitals North now, apparently.
Mhm. Just feed that one-timer, and that's all they apparently can do. It was a big point in the offseason when we signed Elias Lindholm that he should be bumper offense, and right now, it just feels like he sits in the middle of that diamond and is getting absolutely nothing done.
I don't know if I'd say absolutely nothing. Maybe this last week, sure. It seemed like going back to the chemistry thing, because that's just we're gonna beat
Mhm.
that like a dead horse. The first week, it looked like they were trying things, right? That they were
Mhm.
just trying a bunch of different things and the goals will come. This week, it's been like, just give it to pasta. We're out of ideas. We haven't really tried anything and already have ideas. Elias Lindholm perplexes me in that there are games when he is really on it and he gets the points. There are games where he can just be average and he'll get an assist, or, you know, he's there when something goes well, but he hasn't necessarily touched the puck on the immediate, just prior to or process of scoring the goal. And then there's games where he exists in a context of he's on the ice
And that's it.
and the other guys around him are doing their role, but he's on the ice. He's kind of where he should be, but it's one of those things where when you teach kids, you're like, have your stick down, be aware of your surroundings. It's not a petty little thing like that you can kind of pick apart and be like, well, he didn't have a stick down here. He'll just be standing there. Almost like when you play a tabletop hockey game and you're like, this player is one dimensional in the literal sense that they are on a swivel. But I don't know what else you can do to try to motivate him short of maybe give him the Justin Brazeau treatment and reduce some of his ice time. You wouldn't necessarily scratch him entirely. This isn't a John Tortorella team, but if you put him out of his normal routine to say, "Hey, wake up a little bit," what kind of an impact might that have?
He is certainly a talented enough player, but you can't rely on talent alone. Cole Kepke had said a couple of weeks ago that the system was coming easy to him, and maybe the system just isn't coming as easy to Lindholm. I know he had a very quick hot start, but I just don't think he's looked great in the last couple of weeks, and we'll get into his performance in a little bit in another segment. But there are other guys who just aren't bringing it enough. Pavel Zacha's still not bringing it enough to my liking. Marchand maybe finally got the monkey off his back, but we'll
Marcy's
get into
interesting.
that in a little bit as well. Pasta, at least is somewhat contributing. He's putting up the goals, but that's pretty much all I see at this point are goals and not positive things maybe off the puck or, feeding the way he needs to. So this whole top 6 and, most of the top 9 just kind of feels ghostly right now, and that's really strange considering how much you're paying all of them.
Right.
Though while I watched the game at TD Garden against the Stars, you were watching on NESN. They had quite the interesting broadcast we want to get into. Tell us about your thoughts on Unobstructed Views.
Well, first, my only complaint from a sort of director slash not even officially director, but a how the broadcast works standpoint. I was annoyed by the lower third the entire game. The redundancy of having the score bug twice kind of drove me crazy. And, maybe at times they took it off, but they still had who's on the ice. They had the lines, and there was one line within the code somewhere that just kept flashing the entire game, and it drove me insane. So aesthetically, still got a little bit of work to do, but I'm sure they'll get it right next time. They're going to do it at least once a month, so please get it right next time. But as for the chemistry of the broadcast itself, I said this to you just before, and I said it to a couple of friends where I explained if Tuukka Rask is to Dennis Eckersley, Patrice Bergeron is to Jerry Remy. And the three of them, Bergeron, Rask, and Andrew Raycroft, they go back for a number of years. Both Bergeron and Raycroft as first-year players in the 03-04 season and, the literal Rask for Raycroft trade in the goalie department. They know what they're talking about. They can explain it well, and they just bounce off of one another, similar to what you expect when you watch Behind the B or Saturday Sound and they have a player mic'd up. It's a very interesting perspective to see compared to, I don't know, when I watch other alternate broadcasts like the Manning cast, where it's like, yeah, these guys are good, but they're both quarterbacks. They both have the same role. And then some of the guests, it's not about, how do you approach this as a team necessarily? It's more the viral content that can come out of it. This seems a little bit more geared towards, yes, sure, they want to tell their stories and they'll have a few laughs and a great time. But there's something that Tuukka Rask kept going back to and explaining how goals happened and where a goaltender should have been positioned. And Andrew Raycroft saying you can explain every goal that a goalie gives up. It's not necessarily that it's an excuse, it's a reason for why it happened. And that is something just at large in the Boston market, I wish more people would understand. Because the fans have seen Tim Thomas, the fans have seen Tuukka Rask, the fans have seen Jeremy Swayman, and they don't understand what it's like for the majority of the rest of the league in terms of what average goaltending looks like, what above average goaltending looks like, what an off night truly looks like. The Dallas game itself, just by the end of it, Tuukka was kind of explaining, he was like, the worst thing that happens is if you give up an empty net goal, you go back into the net and you give up a goal after that. Because he's like, you're already like, let's all just go home now. But there's nothing that's more embarrassing than that, because you've either had an off night yourself or the team has played kind of poorly, but to just give up that one more goal where you're like, oh geez, why am I here?
I feel like having been in the locker room for about a decade now, I would expect nothing less from Tuukka Rask about both his smarts and his demeanor. That he was always just such a funny guy, always great for a good quote, but is incredibly intelligent. And I completely agree to your point on goaltending. I feel like as far as the Boston market, you're right. We have been especially spoiled when it comes to goaltending. We are not the San Jose Sharks where we're relying on an Aaron Dell hoping a Yaroslav Askarov comes to fruition, or an LA Kings right now who's hoping Darcy Kemper somehow comes back to life and can be the workhorse for them. Or,
He won a cup somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even say we're not in Anaheim. I know I just ran down every single California team. Like, we're not in Anaheim who has a John Gibson who's been there for so many years and you just kind of work him to death. It feels like at every point when our first goalie is ready to kind of give it up and call it quits, the second one is right there behind him, ready to go. So I feel like we just go from prime to prime to prime, and we have maybe an inflated expectation of what it means to be a true goalie in the NHL. So I love that they had Tuukka on, A, just for the laughs, 'cause I'm sure he was hysterical the whole game, but B, his absolute sheer insight.
I would love to see. I know that they probably won't get Henrik Lundqvist on the Source show, but I'd really love to see any broadcast or any just short analysis from Rask and Lundqvist, because they're two of the most intelligent, positionally speaking, goaltenders in the entire history of the league. And the way that they can communicate it to an audience, to a player, to anyone, and just make you understand, oh, so this is what it's really like, as opposed to, I can do that. No, you can't. There is a process to it. There is a lot of training and practice before you get to the big league.
What if you went with like an all goalie broadcast? And I know we talked a little bit before the show about kind of who maybe else could be guest host, but what if you went all goalies? If you got Tim Thomas to come on, Ray Croft is there, so he'll always be there. But like, get a Manny Fernandez or like an Andy Moog or something like that. Just there, maybe someone from a much older era, even than that. Someone to like really bring perspective on like the evolution of goaltending. I feel like that would be a really interesting episode.
A Jerry Cheevers guest spot would be incredible,
Oh,
because
wow.
if you think about goaltending in the 70s and 80s and all that, the numbers that we saw in terms of goals against average and save percentage, the way that it went down because of the dead puck era in the 90s and early 2000s, and the way that's going back up now, how can you compare, Cheevers versus, you'll have Rask and Raycroft literally right there,
Mhm.
and how goalies play now? What are the differences? How does the mindset work? What's the mentality? You know, Cheevers could come on and say, well, back in my day, similar to Tim Thomas, have a hamburger the night before and then go play your game. But now it's more like, hey, you know what? Have a bowl of quinoa and kale and then, get out there and be well, get enough sleep, all this fun stuff.
Back in my day, the butterfly didn't exist. It was just throw your pad out and hope for the goddamn best.
I still do that, admittedly, but that's just because I am not an NHL goaltender.
I also said the 2011 Merlot line, with how great this fourth line is, why not bring back a reunion? I know the logistics may be tough. You said that Danny Paille is coaching in college. He's at Canisius up in Buffalo, but they get a winter break. I know that
I
Sean Thornton
do.
is with the Panthers organization too, but why not? Bring back the Homer Little line, bring back Soupy, bring back Thordy, bring back Danny Paille, and just have a blast talking about the good old days.
The best friend dynamic between Thornton and Rask would be fun to watch on television and scary to watch if you're, working in the censorship department, because one of them would probably just swear and, the FCC would become calling and be like, hey, just a reminder, you're on
One more I think
cable.
we were batting around was Torrey Krug as far as best friendship and chemistry department. If you had Tuukka and Torrey Krug, who overlapped in some really interesting years, and Krug can also just keep chirping the crap out of Marchand the whole time.
Right. And
That's
now,
like locker room extended.
now we could probably say Patra's taller, and that would add another element to it in terms of the next generation.
We do have some short gentlemen on this team. Talking about Matt
Short
Patra
kings, as they
jumping up
say.
trying to hug Justin Brazeau, that was quite a feat.
I love that photo so much.
It reminds me of the Zdeno Chara standing next to Nathan Gerbe.
Except this time they're in the same jersey.
Exactly. So as much as the game itself against Dallas left us with a bitter taste in our mouth, that broadcast seemed to be really fun. But then we turn over a new leaf, or maybe it's the same Leafs, because every time we play Toronto, the same thing happens. And, hopefully it's a good thing. You win 4-3 in overtime in prime time on a Saturday night, a hugely needed win so you don't go on a 3-game losing streak. Marchand getting the overtime goal, hopefully. That replay just looks so close, whether it's his backhand or Pasta's backhand. I think it's Marchand, and I'll give it to him just for credit's sake. But,
Because
he
officially
looked,
it technically is,
yeah.
but
Admittedly, I'll also say he looked better too. And one of the things we just talked about the power play looking stagnant is one change that Monty or whoever's running that power play unit made is he flipped Marchand from being on the half wall. He is now the low guy down on the goal line, and he put Zacha on the half wall, and that set up that power play goal for Pasternak to tie the game back up at 1. I think that unit definitely looked a little better with Marchand running point from down low rather than trying to, snipe from the side and trying to force things.
He has always been a guy that battles and typically wins the battles. Or if he has the puck, he maintains possession of the puck. So it's to your benefit to ensure that the guy that's going to get the puck where it needs to go is Brad Marchand.
And he certainly made the puck go where we needed it to with David Pasternak on that goal. The unfortunate things is that they still can't close out games.
Yes. It's a full 40 minutes to history as opposed to a full 60 minutes to history.
And maybe even call it 45 or 55, but I'm with you there. Just you're up 3-2, you got to close this out, and somehow everybody lets Auston Matthews, the one person you want the least to be as open as he was, to slide behind everyone, easy doorstep tip, tie the game. My head was in my hands, like, he can't do this. Not again.
You could just see him the entire way, and you're like, cover that guy. Somebody cover that guy. Why is nobody covering? And he scored.
It's like the opposite thoughts of when Pasta scored in Game 7 of the playoffs this past spring. Like,
Right.
You see the guy flying, and you should be telling him, like, go cover that guy, go cover. Like, you're watching Mitch Marner just not look in Pasta's direction, saying, Marner, why aren't you covering Pasta? You can see him flying. Now I feel on the other side of it. It's just like, why aren't you covering Matthews? Matthews can fly. He's right there. If he gets the puck, he's going to score.
One of my favorite things, speaking of a full effort, the last 3 games, the Bruins have had 10 shots on goal in the third period alone. Consistency, better than the 7 shots, the 4 shots, the 9 shots, and the fewer shots than that before then. But, 10, 10, 10 every time.
Oddly consistent, but like mediocrely consistent. Like, you wish you were putting up at least 15 shots. Just
right.
Challenge these guys a little more. 10 shots to me says you had less than half the possession in a period, or if you had more of the possession, more of your shots are going wide or getting blocked and your offense was getting stymied. So if I could see 15 or higher, I would really like that. But
compared to last season, in the 3 games that they played, games 7, 8, and 9 on the season, they had 11 shots in the third, 8 shots in the third, and 4 shots in the third. So better than last year.
Some improvement, but
kind of. I mean, they also won.
You just want to be giving up shots the other way. Yeah, it's not even in games where you're up 1 and they tie it like this. It's games where you're up big and you let teams close the gap. They did it against Montreal in the home opener where they were up 3 goals and they let them pull within 1. Same in Colorado. You're up 4-1, you let them pull in 4-3. You're making games unnecessarily dramatic when you don't need to. I feel like there hasn't been a game this season so far where I sit back at the end of the game and go, that was comfortable the whole way through. I was comfortable. I was excited. I didn't feel like there was any chance we were going to lose in any minute.
Exactly. And to be fair to the Avalanche, they are one of the better teams at the comeback since, I want to say, around 2021. Really, after they lost to Vegas in the playoffs, and they're like, you know what, we gotta be clutch a lot more often. They've been that team that even if they're down 4 goals, they're not out of it. And it could be 4-0 in the third period. They're still not out of it. They will make it close. And I did have to laugh. The Predators, they were 0-5-0. They beat the Bruins. They've since then played decently. The Avalanche were 0-4-0. They lost to the Bruins, or they were 0-3-0. Then they were 0-4-0 as a result of their loss, whatever. But they've won since playing the Bruins. So the good news for everyone else is just play the Bruins and you play well after. The bad news is for the Bruins, you can play really well against teams that you're better than, but the way that you stack up against Florida, the way that you stack up against Buffalo coming up soon, the way that you stack up against Ottawa, that might concern me a bit.
It's like they're the Pittsburgh Steelers of the NHL right now. Ironically, in black and gold, they will play up to an opponent when they can, but they absolutely play down to their opponents when they can, and that's not a good trend.
Exactly.
What is a good trend, though, is still the fourth line playing as awesome as ever, and maybe your bottom six guys starting to wake up a little bit. Justin Brazeau scored 2 goals this week. That I'm still reeling at Mark Kastelik's goal from the Toronto game. That spinorama, no-look blind assist from Johnny Beecher in the corner through the crease. Watching the replay, Anthony Stolarz is pointing with his glove at Kastelik like, he's right there, and nobody's covering him. And Beecher still makes that unbelievable feed for that goal. That I'm still really excited about the fourth line. I'm still really excited about some parts of that bottom six. I know we'll talk about Brazeau in a little bit more so, but that fourth line still fantastic
Absolutely.
when you don't break them up.
Oh, I mean, again, the whole blender thing.
Well, I mean, in that Dallas game, I had said that Koepke had started as third line ringer, and by the end of the game, that fourth line was back intact again. And I think for the Toronto game, he went back to, what the traditional lines were for the first couple of games of the season, with a top of Zacha, Lindholm, Pastrnak, then Marchand, Coyle, Geeky, Freddie, Patra, Brazeau, and then that fourth line. So I think he went back to the kind of original lines, I'd call it, of the season. And, we're kind of hoping this is what they need to get over the hump.
Right. And Patra seems to be the key, as he continues to improve. His skating is fantastic. And as he gets a little bit more confident to shoot the puck more, because he's a playmaker, and I have no problem with playmakers. But similar to watching David Krejci over the 20 years of watching David Krejci, you'd look at him, you'd say, if you just shoot the puck 1 out of every 3 times instead of passing 3 out of every 3 times, it could go in. And if it goes in, that's really good, So as he gets more comfortable playing at the NHL level in his new body weight and everything, I would really hope that he gets moved up into the top 6 and plays a prominent role.
We've said, Ace and I, over the last couple of weeks that we think Patra could and should be the second line right winger unless they decide to bring in Tyler Johnson, which we're waiting on. They waived
Any day
Riley
now.
Tufte. It seems like there's the roster spot. Is maybe they just need to make the cap work, but he's right there for the taking, and Tyler Johnson is waiting for the Bruins to sign him. But you're right, Patra seems to be the linchpin for the top 6.
And he continues to be, like 2014 to 2016 David Pastrnak, where I say, give him the ice time. Give him every chance that you can, because he will wow you. And then there'll be times where, yeah, he's young. He's going to make a mistake. Live with the consequences. It's not, you're not a Stanley Cup contender until you go through some sort of, I don't know. It doesn't even have to be a string of 10 losses, but you go through some sort of mountain to climb, whether it's schedule wise, standings wise, or individual player development wise. Like, look at Morgan Geekie right now. He's coming off of a career year last season, and so far this year, no goals. Shout out UC Saros, but an assist or two. So he's got to climb out of that hole that he's in. He's got to climb out of the pit of despair and back into he's your top 9 guy. I don't think he's a second line guy, but he's a solid third liner. He can be that. He did it last year. He can do it again, but he needs to kind of prove it to himself and to everyone else.
I guess this is a good time to talk about our studs and duds of the week. But before we get into that, speaking of people who deserve ice time and some screen time, we've had 2 amazing sponsors who are here for us this season. Let's make sure we give them a shout out too.
This season, the Two Pad Stack podcast is proudly supported by 2 fantastic local businesses. First, we're going to give a shout out to Earth Eagle Brewings, where great beer meets great company. With locations in both Portsmouth and Somersworth, New Hampshire, Earth Eagle is something for everybody. Whether you're relaxing in their Portsmouth beer garden or enjoying live music and trivia at the Somersworth pub, you'll be in good hands with their craft beers, epic hot dogs, and much more. And don't forget, if you're into brewing your own beer, the Homebrew Shop has you covered in Somersworth. And when it comes to tattooing, there's no better place than Vital Ink Tattoo in Barrington, New Hampshire. The artists at Vital Ink are all about turning your ideas into tattoos you'll love forever. The team works hard to make sure every visit is comfortable, and their dedication to making your tattoo experience fun and relaxing is unmatched. Whether you're getting your first piece or adding to your collection, Vital Ink is the place to go. Special thanks to both of these sponsors for supporting the Two Pad Stack podcast this season. Be sure to check them out and show them some love.
Yes, you did hear the Ghost of Ace telling us about our two fantastic sponsors of this season. Some ink, some brews. What's better than that? We thank Ace for helping get those set up. They've been fantastic for us all season. Before the break, we were talking about getting into studs and duds. Ace did chime in. I know he's not with us here, but we do have his for the week. But I guess let's start it with our studs. And Nick, I'll defer to you first. Who would your stud of the week be?
My stud of the week, and speaking of pit of despair into doing exactly what you need to do to prove it to yourself and others, Justin Brazeau, okay? Scratched for a game, comes back, scores a goal, scores another goal. That's one goal in his last two games. That's what you want to see for a response. I'm not saying Brazeau's going to go out there and score 30 goals this season. I would have no complaints if he does that. But in terms of having an immediate impact, in terms of recognizing that your game is not where it needs to be, you've been sat for this reason, watch for what the other guys are doing. Try to implement that in your game. And coming back into the lineup and making a sheer difference in terms of the final result and your productivity. You know, all year he had 0 shots, 1 shot, 0 shots, 1 shot, 0 shots. His last 2 games, 2 shots, 3 shots. That's about where you want to be for a top 9 forward.
I don't know if I'd call Brazeau top line forward, but you're right. You know, getting
That's
out
where
of the
they
pit
fit
of
him for
despair,
now.
you know, he's been healthy scratched twice this season. And so I don't know why it took more than once, but he's pulling himself out of the doghouse. Those 2 goals were great. That slam dunk on the power play against Dallas, a good goal against Toronto. Sometimes you just need to start putting it in the back of the net and things will come. He seemed like he had opened the floodgates at the end of last season, and maybe they were just shut to start the year, but hopefully for him, you know, to chip in, especially in that bottom 9, that if he can draw energy from that fourth line and start putting things in, we need to start making more than just the fourth line tough to play against. And so you do that by hitting hard, which obviously he does as a 6'6", 6'7" type guy. But
Pretty
also
much.
by putting goals in the back of the net, by being infuriating because you hit and you score. And so if he can start bringing that energy, we've talked about it on the podcast the last few weeks, that the energy has to trickle up. It's not trickle down
very
anymore.
much a
It
confidence
used
thing.
to be trickle down where the top line was so stacked. It's now the bottom line, and the energy has to trickle up to everybody else.
Very much a confidence thing for him in terms of you've seen what the fourth line can do. They can easily replace you, but you've been gifted this spot where by default you're on the third line. So make something happen. And the more that he makes something happen, the more confident he gets in carrying the puck, in using his speed. Because a player of his size isn't traditionally as fast as he is. That's one of the fun things about watching Justin Brazeau, because he reminds me of Brad Marchand in his battles along the boards. And then he reminds you of a player that's like 3 or 4 years younger than him, because for some reason he can still break out of the ice from one end to the other pretty easily.
It makes me think of the future of a Bruins prospect who is almost the exact same build and can score probably even more so as Dean Letourneau.
Hopefully more so for the sake of the future of the team.
But I think that's a really good stud of the week, Brazeau. I know I got Aces here with me. He picked David Pastrnak, which makes a lot of sense. He had a goal against Dallas and a goal and an assist against Toronto. So he's been a good enough point producer, goal scorer this season. I think he had a good enough week on that this week. My stud of the week happens to be the guy that fed Pastrnak that goal in the game against Dallas. And we've talked about him a little bit tonight already, and that's Matty Patra. His skating, his energy, regardless of what he's put up on the board, I feel like has been the most consistent all year. And I just said it about Brazeau. Maybe it's one of those things where once it starts coming, it doesn't stop coming. Thanks, all-star there. Thank you for some sort of a little smash mouth. No goals. I know. I don't believe he has any goals this season, but he
Hasn't yet.
is no goals yet.
Not yet.
Okay, but I feel
But
like
it's coming.
yeah, but I feel like the way he's playing, the hockey IQ, his skating, that turnover, the way he pulled that puck from Matt Dumba behind the net, took advantage of that really bad back pass, was in the right place at the right time. Instead of trying to make a weird chip from a strange angle, because he had nobody covering him, he knew that Pasta was coming like a train down the middle of the ice, set himself up to feed Pasta for that easy one-timer goal. Just his thinking, I feel like, has been the most on point and probably the most consistent in the Bruins' top 6 so far. And, he's got 3 points this season so far. I feel like it's coming for him. It's starting the show more so on the scoreboard, but I feel like as far as needing some recognition, Patra needs some right now.
Oh, absolutely. I keep drawing back to the early David Pastrnak days where you would watch him play and you would see that he's the type of player that can see 2 or 3 plays ahead, which is exactly what you need in a prospect and how they develop. As soon as you can start to see 2 or 3 plays ahead in the NHL, you're going to succeed because that's when you start taking your hockey IQ and translating it into hockey I do.
That's a
You'll take
nice
something,
phrase.
you'll see it happen, you envision it, and you make it happen. And you make the play. It's like, think of back all the way to the 2011 Eastern Conference Final against Tampa, Game 7. The Bruins knew the 1-3-1 that the Lightning were playing was fragile if they could just get the puck up, Ference to Krejci on the rush, and have Horton crashing the net. It's that sort of hockey IQ into hockey I do.
It's starting to be I do for Patra, but I also want to put into context, he's 20.
Yep. Makes me
I
feel old.
that, Ace is older than I am, but that makes me feel really old that he's a baby, but he's a prospect still as far as NHL age-wise. He could be in college. And so just the fact that he's looking as amazing as he is right now, he still has so much runway to grow, which makes me extremely excited about his future as a part of like the bigger core of the Bruins.
Exactly. I
Speak-
am psyched for him.
As far as people who are on the core of the Bruins who are not doing well so far, Nick, you've got a really good choice for dud this week.
I do, and it's really hard to pick among the duds because there's a few of them, but arguably the biggest one is Charlie Coyle. He had a goal in Colorado, which, again, if you touch on confidence and it's coming to you as soon as you get on the score sheet, good things start to happen. We thought that would happen after he scored in Colorado. But since then, he has no points. And I get the whole, everyone's playing up a line higher than they should be. Well, he's back on the third line, whatever. He has no points. But not only that, he has 3 shots in his last 3 games, all against Dallas. So that means that in 2 out of his last 3 games, he has no shots on goal. And this isn't even just, it's only been this week that he's recorded a game or 2 without any shots on goal. He had no shots on goal against Florida in the season opener, no shots on goal in the home opener against Montreal, 1 shot against Los Angeles, 2 shots against Florida, 3 shots against Colorado, and 1 of them went in. It's great. No shots on goal against Utah, no shots against Nashville, 3 shots against Dallas, no shots against Toronto. This is someone that you want to step your game up and at least contribute something. And I'm not sure what it is exactly that he's even contributing at this point. Short of, we want to face off.
Hockey PU. Maybe that's his game right now. I get it. He's been in every single one of our studs and duds this week. He was a dud 2 weeks ago. He was a stud last week for scoring that goal. And we were right. We all said, I hope that gives him the confidence to score. Still absolutely nothing. And that's just infuriating as far as the Bruins go, because he's an emotional leader. He's a Massachusetts native. He's fantastic in the community. So he brings like nice things to the team, but it's just not translating right now.
Sometimes you can be nice and nasty, and he has the
Mhm.
size to be a little bit nastier as a player, and we've seen it at times. And we just haven't seen it at all this year,
I
which is
wonder if it would
confusing.
behoove him to be on a line with Aaron's dud, who could also probably stand to be a little nastier and plays great when he's nastier, as Trent Frederick.
And this is why I was thinking of Frederick as possibly being my dud, because whereas Coyle is the veteran and he knows the routine of things, Frederick is really at that age where my expectation is set to be higher for him. He had a great season last year. I said going into the playoffs, that's great and all, but he hasn't really done much in postseason hockey. I get he doesn't have the experience, but I need him to elevate his game from where he's at to the next level, to being the guy that you don't have to score every goal, but you have to score a clutch goal. And he did that against Toronto. And then he went back to being quiet against Florida. So coming into this season, I've wanted to see him become more of that clutch player that he was against Toronto. And what has he done so far?
The reigning 7th player award winner is playing like a 13th forward at this point, and that's really scary considering there's more than a few players who are playing like 13th forwards right now.
And there's how many on a roster?
My dud of the week. We we talked a little bit about it earlier in the podcast, namely on the power play. But in general, Elias Lindholm, I need to shout out as a dud here. If you look at his last 5 games, no points, a cumulative -6, a cumulative 7 shots, and somehow is still earning between 15 and 20 minutes, leaning even closer to 20 minutes of ice time. He had 1937 against Toronto. He had 1955 against Colorado, 1837 against Dallas. Where are you? You are being paid the big bucks to do something. And I get that there are lofty expectations. Nobody's expecting you to be Bergeron, hopefully. I know we talked about baby perfection line and all, but we're not expecting him to be Bergeron. We just think he plays in the mold of Bergeron as a really good, someone very conscientious about being a 200-foot player. He's not going to score 47 goals, but he should put up 25 goals, possibly 30 goals this season. And right now, I'm just not seeing it out of him. This is a call out to be like, you need to do more. You have to do better, especially for the money they're paying him. I know at some point it'll come around because he is talented enough of a player and he has that NHL pedigree. But I'm just so annoyed watching him right now.
When it comes to Lindholm, Elias version, not Hampus, I think back to when the Bruins signed Mark Savard. And I really, I should have done this before, but I really need to go back and rewatch, if I can somehow, the first 10 games of Savard in a Bruins uniform. How much of an impact did he have right away? How much of it was learning not only the system, but the entire city? Because it's not a Calgary, it's not Vancouver, it's not Atlanta in Savard's case. Um, he has been the player that everyone wants him to be a first line center, but realistically, we know he's the second line center of the future. Until then, we need him to be a first line guy because Patra is a little too young, and we don't know what's coming down the pipeline in terms of future prospects or anyone that they might try to acquire or trade for. I thought, at large, in the salary cap era, the modern salary cap era since 0506, have the Bruins ever truly rebuilt the way that a team usually does? And they haven't.
The
And that kind
closest
of
maybe is 15, 16, 16, 17, but that was still it's very on the fly. We haven't had a Detroit of the past few years or a Chicago of the last few years or an Anaheim for most of the years style of rebuild.
right. I mean, you can say, oh, well, they've had the 3 first-round picks in 2015, but they had that without tearing apart the roster entirely, without doing what some of those other teams, what Buffalo would have done, trade your first line center, trade your second line center, trade your best defender, and acquire all those picks and start going through prospects. It's been more of a retool, like what you saw the New York Rangers do. And, that it's just got me thinking at large, like, okay, what is the plan here for centers? And, how does Elias Lindholm fit into that now? Because I know where he fits later, but how can we get him to go play at his best potential now and really live up to that 7 million and change cap it?
First off, all three of those first round draft picks aren't on the team anymore. DeBrusque is gone.
Yeah,
Zaborov's
mine are right.
gone. Senyshyn is long gone. And it is terrifying sitting in a position we are right now and seeing so many of the experts rank the Bruins prospect pool as the worst in the NHL. That is a
Which is
horrifying
always
spot to
fun.
be in on the precipice of what could be a rebuild in the next few years, that you don't even have anything to pull from.
Which is
Terrifying.
further reason why, they got back a first round pick in the Allmark deal. They're probably not trading their first round pick as they approach this year's trade deadline. They have, as of today, $1 million in change in salary cap space, which, as long as guys that aren't on long-term injured reserve or IR in general, you're accruing some of that for deadline day spending, which is part of the reason why maybe we haven't seen Tyler Johnson get signed just yet. Because you look at, like Max Jones, how much more is he truly going to play at the NHL level? And if they send him down, they save a little bit more. Then you can sign Johnson and you still have roughly the same space that you have free as of today.
And call
Or,
up Fabian Lysell.
right? Or do you risk, okay, you sign Johnson and you have slightly less space to play with later, but how much are you truly going to be a buyer by March? And more importantly, the trade deadline is never won by the team with the biggest name player. It's about acquiring the right players.
Look at the 2019 team who acquired Charlie Coyle at that point, who wasn't doing great in Minnesota, and Marcus Johansson. They weren't the flashiest of moves, but they solidified the team in exactly the right way to go on as deep a run as they needed to.
And I always love when people point out that, because then I point out Colorado in 2022. They got Arturi Lehkonen. Okay. It's your third line players that can also be clutch in the right moments. But at that point in time, you fix your third line and you give yourself that depth. And the Bruins don't even have the depth in the top two lines to really say, okay, we've solidified the third line.
There's a larger conversation to be had about Don Sweeney and his vision for the team over the years. But I guess we'll end the podcast on this note, that the real scapegoat, if you look at a team, the first scapegoat is the head coach.
Yep.
Montgomery, we've talked so much about him putting these lineups not only into a blender, but through the ringer. Is he on the hot seat?
I would say it's lukewarm. Had the Bruins lost to Toronto on Saturday, it would be flaming hot right now. But I think it's not quite. It's like when you cook pasta and it comes to a boil, and then you're like, I'm just going to let it simmer a little bit because I want it to just stay warm. I got to make a quick phone call, whatever your reason is. They've turned the heat down a little bit. The win buys him a little more time in the Jim Montgomery era. We will see the Bruins win a game that's a big game for them. But then they'll go on to lose 3 or 4 games in a row after that. That can't happen this time. And you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that is pretty much exactly like the Boston Bruins, except the Leafs don't really have the goaltending. I'm still not convinced by Anthony Stolarz. They don't really have a defense. Of course, you could say, well, the Bruins, they have a bunch of over 6 feet tall guys, and, some of them aren't playing up to par. Doesn't matter. They'll figure it out. The Bruins and the Leafs are in similar positions in terms of being NHL 500. And the difference is Craig Berube is brand new there. He has a long leash to work with. If something doesn't pan out there, it's on Brad Treliving to figure it out. In Boston, you can say, well, Don Sweeney constructed this, but Jim Montgomery's been here for a couple of years now. So it's his system. Take what has been given to you. How do you make it better? And the average career of an NHL head coach with one organization at any point in time is about 3-4 seasons before players just naturally start to tune them out. So you have to start to wonder, if they go on another 3 or 4 game losing streak, has that set in? Have they just simply hit the natural expiration date of, you brought in this guy, you had a spectacular, way above expectation 2022-2023 regular season. He's already hit the first milestone in the Claude Julien school of lukewarm to hot seats. In 2011, if Claude Julien hadn't beaten the Montreal Canadiens with the Bruins, he was probably going to be fired. Jim Montgomery should have beaten, with the Bruins, the Florida Panthers in 2023. That didn't happen. That's strike one. Strike two gets to the point where Claude Julien was approaching February 2017. Montgomery might be right about at that point in time, where if it continues to be stale, you could turn to your associate coach, who you promoted from assistant to associate, Joe Sacco, and say, hey, interim head coach, let's see what we got.
Joe Sacco was a head coach a long time ago. It's been probably a decade since Sacco's been a head coach out in Colorado.
Which was
So-
roughly the same span between Bruce Cassidy's time in Washington and in Boston, about a decade in between.
That is
Not
such a
that
strange
uncommon.
parallel.
Not that uncommon, but also not always that good, because, you know, sometimes they have the second job bump where they've learned all their lessons. They've been back through the rankings and everything. Dan Bilesma, another example, almost a decade, going from Pittsburgh to coaching Coachella Valley to 2 straight Calder Cup final appearances. They didn't win either of those, but hey, he's back in Seattle now.
But I wonder if you let him run the rest of the season and you go for the interesting hire after the season's over. I know you talked before we started about 2 really interesting candidates, one of them being a former Boston Bruin named Marco Sturm, who is quite the hot possible coaching prospect this past offseason.
I love everything about Marco Sturm, just like in general. Really enjoyed his time with the Boston Bruins. I understand there's no replacement for Joe Thornton, but in terms of community guy and player you want in your room, Marco Sturm fit the bill. And, you know, his career in San Jose, you might have said, oh, first, second line forward. But beyond that, he was that third, by the end of his career, maybe fourth line forward, that he just absorbs everything that is around him. And that's what helps make him a better leader and a better head coach than some of these other Wayne Gretzky's out there that, oh, just do it like I did. Yeah, okay, but you're Wayne Gretzky, so how can you do that? You know, Marco Sturm, his time leading Germany in the 2018 Winter Games, that impressed me enough to say I would want to have this guy in my organization and to promote him somewhere. And I don't understand how the Kings have let him simmer as long as they have. He was an assistant coach, and then they said, oh, okay, go down to the AHL level, go be the head coach of Ontario. Why aren't they just putting him in full-time as the head coach instead of the 20 different directions they made in the Rob Blake administration? That's a guy that if you get to the end of the year and you can talk to him, hire him. I want to see what he can do at the NHL level. And if the Kings are overcooking him, similar to Columbus with Jared Bednar, Colorado comes in and says, hey, can we have that guy? Thanks. What do you know? They won the cup in 2022. Columbus, in the meantime, how many coaches have they gone through?
Too many to count.
And some of them haven't even coached a game.
Speaking of guys who haven't necessarily coached head coach at the NHL level, but he's been an assistant coach at the NHL level, namely behind the Bruins bench in the Bruce Cassidy era, a former Bruin on the ice as well, a BU Terrier. You keep it local, as Don Sweeney seems to really love to do in any time he can. Why not Jay Pandolfo? He's made the BU Terriers a fantastic program. You know, I was there at one of the peaks of BU in the last decade or so when David Quinn was head coach. They had Jack Eichel. They had Evan Rodriguez, who has turned himself into an NHL quality, like consistent NHL quality player. we went through that, and then he left and became the head coach of the New York Rangers, and they brought in Albie O'Connell. And I mean, no offense to Albie, but he wasn't bringing it. The recruiting wasn't there. The level of play wasn't there. And BU decides, okay, let's go to Pandolfo. Let's see what he's got. Maybe he got lucky having Celebrini, but he's brought the talent back. Lane Hudson, Cole Hudson, all the Hudson brothers, quite frankly. Cole Iserman. They have been ranked consistently in the top 3 in the NCAA for the past 2 seasons now. I know that there isn't a ton of history between guys going straight from the NCAA to the NHL with success. Dave Hackstall did it. He was with the Flyers when he came over from North Dakota. Didn't translate well. Quinn didn't translate great in New York. But if someone might be able to do it in the right way, because he already has some NHL coaching experience, I feel like Pandolfo would be a great candidate.
That's the big difference maker, is that being the assistant that he was under Bruce Cassidy years ago, that gives him an edge up on the competition in terms of all the college hockey coaches that you could potentially call up and say, hey, we'll give you a shot. My fear is the Bruins would talk to Jay Pandolfo and then hire David Quinn. And that would be a step in the wrong direction.
That would be a very weird direction. I'm an advocate for David Quinn. I do love him. Just not as an NHL head coach. It hasn't worked. I know he's an assistant out in Pittsburgh, which that's not working so well there. I wonder
Speaking
how
of
much
coaches that should be removed.
Hey, that upsets Charlie McAvoy a little bit. That's his father-in-law you're
Okay.
talking about.
And I love Mike Sullivan dearly, but it is very apparent that in the Penguins system, his message they aren't receiving it anymore. And I think he would probably say, you know what? It's fine. This is where you mutually part ways. You go on to do bigger and better things. And the Penguins continue to miss the playoffs. And I have no complaints about that.
Enough conjecture about the future, as much as that's really interesting to see who could
Jim Montgomery still has his job.
He still has that at least for another week. We've got quite a jam-packed week. We have 4 games coming up before we bring you another episode. We're releasing this Tuesday morning, so this evening we're playing the Philadelphia Flyers at home. I will be in attendance. I'm seeming like it's 1 game a week now for me, which is kind of fun. My wallet's not really happy, but it's been fun going to games so far. And then we're at Carolina on Halloween. Saturday, we start our first back-to-back game of the season. We are at Philly on Saturday, and we come home to play Seattle. So really jam-packed. They're going to be exhausted. We'll have a lot to talk about next week. Ace will be back. But Nick, it's been great having you on. I know I plugged Goalie Hugs, but tell us where else we can find you.
Well, first, thanks for having me. And second, years ago, I had a blog, Down the Frozen River. I still do that very sparingly, but maybe I'll write more stuff as grad school gets easier. Winter break's coming up. But the other place you can find me making guest appearances more often than anyone else is Brews and Bruins. And if you don't see me on the podcast, you will see Brews News, which is something that is a fake magazine cover for every game that myself and Sean Rajat will often create, or will co-write things. I want to give a shout out to Sean, because he continues to push me in the further and further in the direction of make it bigger and better, as opposed to when I started doing that, which was very minimalistic and very pun heavy. But yeah, so you can see me around the internet, basically. At Lancy53. I'm on Twitter and all the fun stuff. And occasionally I'll come around with a good stat that people go, wow, neat, and retweet.
I'm glad you plugged your own personal one, because you're a great follower in general. So it's been a pleasure having you on this week, man. I appreciate the guest step up. Asa, I hope will listen to the podcast and go, wow, we got to have you back on more often.
I'll be back anytime you want me.
I appreciate that. That'll wrap it up for us for this week. We got a busy one coming up. Ace will be back next week. I'll be back next week. But that'll finish up 2 Pad Stack. On behalf of Nick and myself, Jake Reiser, have a good one.